The compass had been wrong for 3 days straight, and Eliza Monroe knew that if she relied on it any longer, she would die in the Texas wilderness with nothing but buzzards to mark her grave. She stood alone under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, her father's broken compass heavy in her palm. The night air carried the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its lonely song. Eliza tilted her head back and traced the familiar patterns overhead, finding Polaris with the ease of breathing. Her father had taught her the stars before she could read, sitting on the porch of their Kansas farm while her mother hummed inside. He had been a surveyor, a man who understood the land and sky in equal measure, and he had passed that knowledge to his daughter like other men pass down silver or cattle. But her father was dead now, buried 6 months past, and her mother had followed him within weeks, her heart simply giving out from grief. At 22 years old, Eliza found herself alone with nothing but a wagon, a rifle, and a burning need to reach San Antonio, where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. She had sold the farm for barely anything, packed what little she owned, and started south. The guide she had hired in Dallas had abandoned her after 2 weeks, stealing half her supplies and her best horse, leaving her with an old mare and shattered trust. So now she navigated by the stars, just as her father had taught her, and she had not been lost since. The sound of cattle reached her before she saw them, a low rumbling that vibrated through the earth. Eliza tensed, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle propped against her wagon. She had camped near a creek, thinking herself alone, but clearly she had been wrong. The sound grew louder, accompanied now by the shouts of men and the crack of whips. A cattle drive moving through the night. She should have felt afraid, a woman alone with strange men approaching, but Eliza had learned that fear without action was useless. She checked her rifle, made sure her long dark hair was pinned securely under her hat, and waited. The first rider appeared over the ridge, silhouetted against the star-bright sky. He sat tall in the saddle, moving with the easy grace of a man born to ride. Behind him came the cattle, hundreds of them, their horns catching the moonlight like pale ghosts. More riders flanked the herd, keeping the animals moving, their voices carrying in the still air. The lead rider spotted her wagon and changed direction, approaching slowly. Eliza stood her ground, rifle held loosely but ready. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark eyes studying her with equal caution. "Evening, miss," he called out, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. His voice was deep, with a drawl that spoke of Texas born and raised. "Didn't expect to find anyone camped out here." "I could say the same about a cattle drive moving at night," Eliza replied, keeping her voice steady. The cowboy pushed his hat back slightly and she caught a glimpse of dark hair and a strong jaw. "We are trying to make up time, lost 2 days to a storm that scattered half the herd." He paused, his eyes moving from her to the wagon and back. "You are alone?" "I am." Something shifted in his expression, concern maybe, or surprise. "That is dangerous country for a woman traveling solo. Where is your party?" "I do not have one," Eliza said simply. "I am heading to San Antonio." Another rider approached, older and grizzled, with a beard that reached his chest. "Boss, we need to keep moving. Those cattle are not going to drive themselves." The younger man, apparently the boss, nodded but did not take his eyes off Eliza. "Hold them at the creek for watering. I will catch up." The older cowboy looked skeptical but obeyed, riding back toward the herd. The boss dismounted, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Name is James Thornton. That is my herd and those are my men. We are driving to Abilene, about 800 head. Eliza Monroe." She lowered the rifle slightly, though she did not set it aside. "Abilene is north." "You are heading the wrong direction." James Thornton let out a short laugh, running a hand through his hair. "That is the problem, Miss Monroe. Our guide got himself shot in a card game 3 nights back, died before morning." Since then, we have been trying to navigate by compass and guesswork, but I am starting to think we are turned around. Eliza glanced at the stars again, then back at the cowboy. You are not just turned around, you are heading almost due south. At this rate, you will end up in Mexico. His jaw tightened, and she saw frustration flash across his face. I was afraid of that. We have 3 months to get these cattle to Abilene or I lose everything. My ranch, my land, all of it. I took a loan to buy this herd, and if I do not deliver on time, the bank takes it all. There was something raw in his voice, a desperation that Eliza recognized because she had felt it herself. She studied him in the starlight, this cowboy who stood to lose everything, and made a decision that would change both their lives. I can get you to Abilene, she heard herself say. James stared at her. What? I can navigate by the stars. I can get you to Abilene. Eliza straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. My father was a surveyor. He taught me how to read the sky better than any map. I have been navigating myself for the past month without getting lost once. You want to lead a cattle drive? Disbelief colored his words, but there was hope there too, barely contained. I want to go north, which is the same direction you need to go. San Antonio can wait. My aunt is not expecting me at any particular time. Eliza set the rifle down carefully. You need a guide, and I need protection and company for the journey. It seems like a fair trade. James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if trying to determine whether she was serious or mad. Finally, he said, You understand what you are offering. A cattle drive is not a leisurely trip. We are talking 12 to 14 hours a day in the saddle, river crossings, possible stampedes, storms, heat, dust, and men who are not always on their best behavior. I understand. And you can really navigate by stars. No compass, no map, just stars. Eliza pointed to the sky. Polaris, the North Star, never moves. It sits almost directly over the northern pole. You find it by following the pointer stars in the Big Dipper, which is right there. As long as I can see the stars, I can tell you which way is north. The rest is just understanding distance and terrain. James followed her finger, looking up at the constellation she indicated. When he looked back at her, something had shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. My grandfather used to navigate like that, said it was more reliable than any compass because stars do not break or point you wrong. He was right. If you are wrong, if you get us lost, I lose everything, I know. Then again, if I keep going the way I have been, I will definitely lose everything. James held out his hand. You have yourself a deal, Miss Monroe. Lead us to Abilene, and I will make sure you get there safely with pay for your trouble. Eliza shook his hand, feeling the calloused strength in his grip. I do not need pay, just company and protection on the road. You will get both, I promise. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from worried to almost handsome. Welcome to the Thornton Cattle Drive. We leave at first light. That night, Eliza barely slept. She lay in her wagon, listening to the sounds of the camp, the cattle lowing, the men talking in low voices around their fires, the horses nickering softly. She had just agreed to lead a cattle drive, something no woman she knew had ever done. Her mother would have been horrified. Her father would have been proud. When dawn broke across the Texas plain in streaks of gold and rose, Eliza was already awake and studying the landscape. James found her standing on a small rise, her eyes on the horizon. Morning, he said, offering her a tin cup of coffee. Sleep well? Well enough. She accepted the coffee gratefully, the bitter warmth cutting through the morning chill. We should head northwest. There is a river about 2 days from here if we keep a steady pace. We can follow it north for a while before cutting east toward Kansas. James pulled out a battered map, studying it. The Brazos River, probably. That matches what our old guide said before he died. He glanced at her with newfound appreciation. How do you know the rivers? My father had maps. I studied them before I left Kansas. I might not have them with me, but I remember. She tapped her temple. I have always been good at remembering details. I am starting to think you might actually get us to Abilene. James folded the map and tucked it away. Come on, I will introduce you to the crew. Fair warning, they are going to be skeptical about taking orders from a woman. He was not wrong. The 7 men who made up James Thornton's crew stared at Eliza with expressions ranging from surprise to outright hostility. The oldest, the grizzled man from the night before, crossed his arms over his chest. "Boss, you cannot be serious. A woman leading us." "Dead serious, Frank." James kept his voice level but firm. "Miss Monroe can navigate by stars, which is more than any of us can do. She gets us to Abilene or we all lose. Those are the options." A younger cowboy, barely 20 with red hair and freckles, spoke up. "No disrespect, miss, but driving cattle is not women's work. It is dangerous and hard, and I am not asking to punch cattle or rope steers," Eliza interrupted calmly. "I am offering to navigate, to tell you which direction to drive the herd. You all can do the actual cowboy work." Another man, lean and dark with suspicious eyes, spat into the dust. "What if she gets us lost? What if she is lying about knowing the stars?" James stepped forward, his voice hardening. "Then we are no worse off than we are now, but I believe her, and this is my drive, my cattle, my decision. Miss Monroe is our guide. Anyone who has a problem with that can take their pay and leave right now." The silence stretched taut. Finally, Frank sighed and shook his head. "I have been with you since you bought your first 50 head, James. I am not leaving now, but I am saying this is a damn fool risk." "Noted." James looked at the others. "Anyone else?" One by one, the men shook their heads, though several still looked unhappy. Eliza met each man's eyes, letting them see she was not intimidated. She would have to earn their respect, she knew, but she could do that. She had dealt with skeptical men before. "We move out in an hour," James announced. "Miss Monroe will ride up front with me. We are heading northwest. Let us make up some of that lost time." The first day was harder than Eliza had anticipated, though she never let it show. The saddle chafed despite her practical split skirt. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the dust from 800 cattle coated everything. But she kept her eyes on the horizon and the sun's position, adjusting their course as needed, and when James asked if she was sure of their direction, she answered with confidence. By evening, they had covered good ground. As the men made camp and set up watches for the herd, James approached Eliza where she stood looking at the emerging stars. "You did well today," he said quietly. "I think even Frank is starting to believe you might know what you are doing." "I do know what I am doing." She pointed to a cluster of stars. "See that? Cassiopeia. It is always opposite the Big Dipper across Polaris. You can use it to double-check your direction." James studied the stars, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I wish I had paid more attention when my grandfather tried to teach me this. I was too busy thinking I knew everything." "How old were you when he died?" 16. "Old enough to be an idiot, young enough to think I was invincible." He smiled ruefully. "He left me the ranch, 500 acres outside Austin. I have been building it up ever since, buying cattle, improving the land. This drive, if it succeeds, will set me up for years. If it fails," he shrugged, "I will be back to nothing. It will not fail." Eliza surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "We will get to Abilene." James looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in the starlight, an understanding perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "I am glad you were camped by that creek, Miss Monroe." "Eliza," she said softly. "Call me Eliza." "Eliza." He tested the name, nodding. "I am glad you were there, Eliza." The days fell into a rhythm. They rose before dawn, drove the cattle through the heat of the day with periodic rests, and made camp at night. Eliza navigated using the sun during the day and the stars at night, keeping them on course. Slowly, the men began to accept her presence. Frank started asking her questions about navigation, genuinely curious. The young redhead, whose name was Tommy, began saving her the best portions at meals. Even the suspicious dark-haired cowboy, called Santos, gave her grudging nods of acknowledgement. But it was James whose opinion mattered most to her, though Eliza tried not to examine why that was. They rode together every day, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of building something lasting. She told him about her parents, about the farm in Kansas, about feeling untethered since their deaths. "I feel like I am drifting," she admitted one evening as they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Like I lost my anchor when they died." "I know that feeling," James said quietly. "When my grandfather died, I felt lost for years. The ranch anchored me eventually, gave me purpose. You will find your anchor, Eliza. Maybe it is waiting in San Antonio. Maybe it is somewhere else entirely." She looked at him, at the strong profile and the gentle eyes, and wondered if maybe her anchor was not a place at all. 3 weeks into the drive, they reached the Red River. The water ran high and fast, swollen from recent rains, and the cattle balked at the crossing. Eliza sat on her mare, studying the current and the far bank. "We need to cross here," she said to James. "If we go further east looking for an easier crossing, we will add days to the trip. You cannot afford that. That current is strong. We could lose cattle. Hell, we could lose men." "I know." Eliza met his worried gaze. "But I also know this is the best option. Cross in the morning when the cattle are fresh and the light is good. Send your strongest riders across first to guide them." James was quiet, then nodded slowly. "You have not been wrong yet. We will cross at dawn." That night the camp was tense. The men knew river crossings were dangerous, that cattle could panic and drown, that horses could be swept away. Eliza lay in her wagon, unable to sleep, second-guessing her decision. If someone died because of her advice, could she live with that? A soft knock on the wagon side made her start. "Eliza, you awake, James?" She pushed back the canvas flap to find him standing there, hat in his hands. "I cannot sleep," she admitted. "Neither can I." He hesitated. "Can I sit with you for a bit?" She nodded, moving over to make room on the wagon gate. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The night was alive with sounds, cattle moving restlessly, men talking in low voices, the river rushing in the distance. "Are you worried I made the wrong call?" Eliza asked. "No. I am worried something will go wrong, but that is different from thinking you made the wrong call." James turned to look at her, his face serious in the moonlight. "I trust you, Eliza. I want you to know that. Whatever happens tomorrow, I trust your judgment." The simple words hit her harder than she expected. When had anyone last told her they trusted her? When had anyone looked at her the way James was looking at her now, with respect and something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster? "Thank you," she whispered. "I should let you sleep." But he did not move, and neither did she. They sat in the silver darkness, shoulders finally touching, and Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt like hope, like possibility, like the beginning of something she had not known she was looking for. "James," she started, not sure what she meant to say. He turned toward her, and suddenly his face was very close to hers. "Eliza, he stopped, swallowed hard. "This probably is not the time, but I need to say this. These past weeks with you, you are not like anyone I have ever met. You are brave and smart, and you look at the stars like they are old friends. I find myself looking for excuses to ride beside you, to hear you talk, to see you smile." Eliza's breath caught. "James, I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I also know that what I feel for you is real." His hand came up tentatively, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. "I think I am falling in love with you, Eliza Monroe." She should have been sensible. She should have remembered that she was heading to San Antonio, that he had a ranch in Austin, that their paths were only temporarily aligned. But when she looked into his eyes, all she could think was that she felt it too. This connection that had grown between them like something inevitable and right. "I am falling in love with you too," she breathed. And then his lips were on hers, soft and sure, and the whole world narrowed to just this moment. This kiss, this man who trusted her and believed in her and looked at her like she hung the very stars she navigated by. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about what this means, about what happens after Abilene. After we cross the river, Eliza said firmly. One impossible thing at a time, he laughed softly, kissing her again. One impossible thing at a time. The crossing at dawn was controlled chaos. James sent Santos and Frank across first, their horses plunging into the swift water. They made it to the far side, then waved the all-clear. The cattle were driven into the water in groups, the cowboys shouting and whistling, keeping them moving. Eliza watched from the near bank, her heart in her throat, praying her judgment had been sound. Most of the herd made it across without incident, but then one of the younger steers panicked in the middle of the river. It bellowed and thrashed, creating chaos. Other cattle began to mill and turn back. Tommy, trying to turn them, got too close. His horse stumbled in the current, and suddenly both horse and rider were being swept downstream. Tommy! James spurred his horse into the water without hesitation. Eliza screamed his name, but he was already riding hard through the current, fighting to reach the struggling cowboy. She watched in frozen horror as the river tried to claim them both, as James reached Tommy and grabbed his shirt, hauling him toward his own horse. Frank and Santos rode in from the far side, and together the three men got Tommy and his horse to the far bank. Eliza found herself shaking with relief, tears streaming down her face. James was safe. Tommy was safe. The herd was across by the time she and the remaining cowboys crossed with the wagon and supply horses. James was waiting on the far side, soaked and exhausted but grinning. He pulled her from her horse the moment she reached solid ground, holding her tight despite being dripping wet. "You were right," he said into her hair. "This was the best crossing point, we made it. You could have died," she choked out, holding him tighter. "But I did not. We did not." He pulled back to look at her face, wiping away her tears with his wet thumb. "We are all fine, Eliza. Your navigation was perfect." The respect in the men's eyes after that was different, complete. She had proven herself not just as a navigator but as someone who made hard calls and stood by them. That night around the fire, Frank raised his coffee cup to her. "To Miss Eliza, who got us across the Red River and is going to get us to Abilene." "To Miss Eliza," the others echoed, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Later, when the camp had quieted, James found her again under the stars. "Walk with me." They walked away from the firelight into the darkness of the plain until they were alone with just the stars and the night sounds. James took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I meant what I said last night," he began. "I am in love with you, Eliza. I know the timing is terrible and the situation is complicated, but I need you to know that I do not want this to end in Abilene. I do not want you to go to San Antonio and disappear from my life." Eliza's heart raced. "What are you saying?" "I am saying come to Austin with me after the drive. Come see the ranch, see if you could make a life there, see if you could make a life with me." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a month. But I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone, and I do not want to lose you because I was too scared to ask you to stay." She looked up at him, this cowboy who had trusted her when he had every reason not to, who had kissed her like she was precious, who was now asking her to build a future with him. San Antonio seemed very far away suddenly and very unimportant. Her aunt was a stranger, after all, a woman she barely remembered. But James was here and real and looking at her with such hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." He looked stunned, as if he had expected her to refuse. "Yes, I will come to Austin. Yes, I want to see if we can build something together. Yes, James, just yes." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, his hands tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together under the canopy of stars. "I am going to marry you, Eliza Monroe," he said with absolute certainty. "Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but someday soon. I am going to marry you and spend the rest of my life making you happy. I am going to hold you to that," she whispered back and kissed him again. The next weeks were both the hardest and the best of Eliza's life. The terrain grew rougher as they moved north into Kansas. There were storms that scattered the herd, forcing them to spend days rounding up strays. There were long, hot days where water was scarce and tempers ran short. But through it all, Eliza navigated true, keeping them on course, and James was always beside her, steady and strong. Their relationship was no secret to the crew. They saw how James and Eliza looked at each other, how they sat together every evening under the stars, how James was never far from her side. Instead of disapproval, the men seemed pleased, as if Eliza had become a kind of good luck charm for the drive. "Boss is happier than I have ever seen him," Frank commented to Eliza one evening as they rode. "You are good for him, miss. He has been alone too long, building that ranch with nothing but work to keep him company." "He is good for me too," Eliza admitted. "I was drifting before I met him. Now I feel like I have direction again." "That is what love does," Frank said with the wisdom of his years. "Gives you a reason to get up in the morning besides just surviving." 8 weeks into the drive, with Abilene finally just days away, disaster struck. A group of riders approached the herd at dusk, 6 rough-looking men who sat their horses with aggressive confidence. Eliza felt James tense beside her. "Bandits," he said quietly. "Stay behind me." The leader of the group, a scarred man with cold eyes, rode forward. "Nice herd you have got here. Shame if something happened to it." "We do not want trouble," James said evenly. "We are just passing through." "Oh, we are not offering trouble, we are offering protection." The bandit smiled without warmth. "For a reasonable fee, say 50 head of cattle." 50 head, James's voice hardened. "That is not protection, that is theft. Call it what you want. But without our protection, who knows what might spook your herd in the night? Be a real shame to lose cattle to a stampede this close to Abilene." The threat was clear. Eliza saw James's jaw clench, saw his hand move toward his gun. The other bandits reached for their weapons. This was about to turn deadly. "Wait," she said loudly, riding forward before James could stop her. "Wait." "Eliza, get back," James hissed, but she ignored him, focusing on the bandit leader. "You want cattle, I understand that. But 50 head is too much. It would ruin us." She kept her voice calm and reasonable, though her heart was hammering. "What if we offered you something else? Food, supplies, some money. We do not have much, but we could give you enough to last a few weeks." The bandit studied her with surprise and something like amusement. "A woman negotiating, that is new." "A practical person negotiating," Eliza corrected. "You shoot us, you get nothing but murder charges. We fight, people die on both sides, but if we make a deal, everyone rides away intact." A long silence stretched out. The bandit leader looked at his men, then back at Eliza. "You have nerve, I will give you that. Fine. $50 in gold, all your spare food, and a dozen horses. That is my final offer." James opened his mouth to protest, but Eliza cut him off. "Deal, but only if you leave us enough food to reach Abilene and keep the saddle horses." "Deal." The bandit actually smiled, a real smile this time. "You are all right, lady. Your man should listen to you more often." The exchange was made quickly. It hurt to give up their reserves, but Eliza knew it was better than the alternative. As the bandits rode away, Frank let out a long breath. "That was smart thinking, Miss Eliza. Probably saved lives." But James was not happy. As soon as the bandits were out of sight, he rounded on her. "That was reckless. They could have shot you. They could have—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "You cannot just ride into danger like that, Eliza. You scared me half to death." "I scared you. You were about to draw on 6 armed men." Her own fear translated to anger. "That was suicide, James. That was my herd, my responsibility. And I made it mine when I agreed to lead this drive. We are partners in this, remember?" She was shaking now, adrenaline catching up with her. "I could not just sit back and watch you get killed." James stared at her, and then suddenly he was off his horse and pulling her down from her mare, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You are right. I am sorry. You were brave and smart, and I am just angry because the thought of anything happening to you tears me apart." Eliza clung to him, her anger dissolving into relief. "Nothing happened, we are fine, we still have the herd, and Abilene is just ahead." I love you, he said fiercely. God, Eliza, I love you so much. I love you too. She pulled back to kiss him, not caring that the entire crew could see. We are in this together, James Thornton. All of it. 4 days later, they drove the herd into Abilene. The town was bustling with cattle drives, buyers, and cowboys. Eliza sat on her horse beside James, staring at the railroad tracks and the cattle pens, hardly believing they had made it. 10 weeks, hundreds of miles, countless challenges, but they had made it. James turned to her with a grin so wide it transformed his whole face. We did it. Eliza, we actually did it. The cattle sold for even more than James had hoped. After paying his men their wages plus generous bonuses, settling his debts and restocking supplies, he still had enough profit to secure his ranch for years. That night, the crew celebrated in a local saloon, toasting their success and their navigator. To Miss Eliza, Frank declared, raising his glass. The best guide in the West and the bravest woman I have ever met. To Miss Eliza, the others cheered, but Eliza barely heard them. She was looking at James, who was looking back at her with such love in his eyes that it made her chest ache with happiness. Later, they walked through the streets of Abilene, away from the noise and celebration. James led her to a small church on the edge of town, its white steeple pale in the moonlight. Eliza Monroe, he said, taking both her hands in his. I know I said I would marry you someday soon, but I do not want to wait. I do not want another day to pass where you are not my wife. He dropped to one knee right there on the church steps, and Eliza's heart stopped. I do not have a ring yet. I will get you one, the prettiest one I can find, but I have my word and my heart, and they are both yours. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I navigate life with? Tears streamed down Eliza's face as she pulled him to his feet. Yes, 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 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 days later in that same church, with Frank standing as witness and the rest of the crew in attendance. Eliza wore a simple blue dress she bought in town, and James wore his best shirt and a nervous smile. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister said James could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that made her cry all over again. Mrs. Thornton, he whispered against her lips. I love the sound of that. So do I, she whispered back. So do I. They spent their wedding night in Abilene's best hotel, a luxury after months of sleeping under stars and in wagons. In the morning, wrapped in her new husband's arms, Eliza felt a contentment she had not known since before her parents died. She had found her anchor, her purpose, her home. It was not a place. It was this man, this life they were building together. Ready to see the ranch? James asked, kissing her temple. Ready to see our ranch, Eliza corrected with a smile. The journey to Austin took 2 weeks, and when they finally rode up to the ranch, Eliza fell in love with it immediately. The house was small but well built, with a wide porch perfect for watching stars. The land stretched out in rolling hills covered in grass, with a creek running through the property and mountains visible in the distance. It is perfect, she breathed. It is ours, James said, dismounting and helping her down. Every acre, every building, every tree. Ours to build on, to pass down, to fill with a family. He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, kissing her in the front room of their home. Their home. The word still felt strange and wonderful. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment. Eliza learned how to run a ranch, how to manage the hands James hired, how to keep the books and plan for the future. She also learned the rhythms of her husband, his quiet morning mood, his laughter when something surprised him, his passion when he held her at night. She learned she loved all of it, loved the life they were building, loved waking up beside him every morning. In the evenings, they sat on the porch together, and Eliza taught James the stars properly this time. He was a dedicated student, memorizing constellations and their stories, learning to navigate the way she did. Why did your grandfather want you to learn this? She asked one night as they traced patterns in the sky. He used to say that a man who knows the stars is never truly lost. James replied, his arm around her shoulders. He said they were constant when everything else changed, reliable when people failed you. I think he would have liked you, Eliza. He would have appreciated someone who understood what he was trying to teach me. I wish I could have met him. Me too, James kissed her hair. But he would be happy knowing his ranch is in good hands, that it is going to continue, maybe even grow into something bigger. The ranch did grow. With the profits from the drive and Eliza's careful financial planning, they were able to buy more land, increase their herd, and hire more hands. Within a year, the Thornton Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the county. But even as they built their success, Eliza and James never forgot the cattle drive that had brought them together, the stars that had guided them both to each other. 2 years after their marriage, on a spring evening that smelled of wildflowers and rain, Eliza told James she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he kept saying, his hands on her still flat belly. "We are having a baby. We are." She covered his hands with hers, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "A little navigator, maybe, or a cowboy like their father. Or both," James said, kissing her. "God, Eliza, I cannot believe how lucky I am. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," she replied. "That night when I camped by the creek when your herd came through, that was fate bringing us together. Then I am grateful to fate." He knelt down, pressing a kiss to her belly. "And I am grateful to the stars that brought you to me." Their son was born in December, during the first snowfall of the season. They named him Thomas after James's grandfather, but called him Tommy. He was healthy and strong, with his mother's dark hair and his father's eyes, and from the moment James held him, Eliza knew her husband was utterly lost to fatherhood. "He is perfect," James whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "Eliza, he is perfect." "He is ours," she said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Our perfect little cowboy." Tommy grew up on the ranch, learning to ride almost before he could walk, following his father everywhere. But he also inherited his mother's love of the stars. Many evenings found all three of them on the porch, with Eliza teaching Tommy the constellations while James looked on with pride. 3 years after Tommy, they had a daughter they named Sarah, after Eliza's mother. She was quieter than her brother, thoughtful and observant, and she took to navigation like she was born to it. By the time she was 6, she could find north by stars or sun, and she loved helping her mother with the ranch's planning and bookkeeping. The Thornton Ranch continued to flourish. They became known throughout Texas not just for their quality cattle, but for their integrity. James never forgot the lessons of that first drive, and he made sure to treat his hands fairly, to navigate his business with the same careful attention Eliza used with the stars. They did 3 more drives to Abilene over the years, and Eliza went on every one, navigating them true, her children growing up on the trail as much as on the ranch. Frank stayed with them until he was too old to ride, then retired to a cottage on their property where he could watch the grandchildren play. Tommy grew up hearing stories of that first drive, of how his mother had navigated them through wilderness and danger, of how his parents had fallen in love under the stars. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James gave Eliza a gift that made her cry. It was a sextant, beautiful and precise, engraved with the words to my North Star who guides me home. "Forever, James, so you never get lost," he said, holding her close. "Not that you ever would, but just in case." "I could never get lost as long as I have you," she replied, kissing him. "You are my constant, James Thornton, my true north." They stood on their porch that night, their children asleep inside, the ranch prosperous and peaceful around them, and looked up at the stars together. Eliza traced the familiar patterns, the constellations she had used to lead them across miles of wilderness to each other, and felt the deep contentment of a life well lived and a love well earned. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked softly. "Giving up San Antonio, your aunt, the life you might have had?" "Never, not for a single moment." She turned in his arms to face him. "That night you found me by the creek, I was lost in every way that mattered. I had no direction, no purpose, no real future. You gave me all of that. You gave me a reason to navigate, a destination worth reaching. You gave me the same," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I was so focused on saving the ranch that I forgot why I wanted to save it. You reminded me that land and cattle mean nothing without someone to share them with, without love and family and a future bigger than just survival." They kissed under the stars, the same stars that had guided their journey, that had witnessed their love story from the beginning. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Beyond the porch, their ranch stretched out under the moonlight, prosperous and peaceful. And above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, constant and true, just like the love Eliza and James had found in the wilderness of the Wild West. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Tommy grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's sharp mind for navigation and planning. He took over more of the ranch operations as James grew older, though James never fully retired. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who respected her intelligence and loved her fierceness, and together they started their own ranch just a few miles away. Eliza and James became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree branching out across Texas. But no matter how many years passed, no matter how much their lives changed, every evening found them on that porch looking up at the stars together. It was their ritual, their constant, the thing that connected them back to that moment when a lost cowboy had found a woman navigating by starlight and had the courage to ask for her help. "Do you remember that first night?" Eliza asked one evening, her hair now silver, her face lined with age but her eyes still bright. "When you rode up to my wagon?" "Every detail," James replied, his own hair white now, his hands gnarled but still strong. "I remember thinking you were the bravest thing I had ever seen, standing there with your rifle, all alone but not afraid. I remember looking at you under the stars and thinking I should probably be worried about my herd, but all I could think about was how beautiful you were. You never told me that part. I am telling you now." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing after 40 years of marriage. "I fell in love with you that first night, Eliza, before you even agreed to guide us. I fell in love with the way you looked at the stars like you could read stories in them. I just did not know it yet. I fell in love with you when you trusted me," she said softly. "When you put everything you had on the line and believed I could lead you home. No one had ever trusted me like that before. Best decision I ever made." James kissed her temple, a gesture as familiar as the constellations above them. "That and asking you to marry me in front of that church in Abilene. Best decision I ever made was saying yes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, until Tommy came out onto the porch. He was 40 years old now, with children of his own, but to Eliza he would always be that tiny baby she had held in December's snow. "Mother, father, you should come inside. It is getting cold." "In a minute," Eliza said, the same thing she always said. "Just a few more minutes with the stars." Tommy smiled, the same smile his father had given her a lifetime ago, and went back inside. Eliza leaned against James, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of him beside her, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that creek in Texas to this porch, from strangers to partners to lovers to husband and wife, all of it guided by the stars and by the choices they had made to trust each other, to love each other, to build a life together against all odds. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finding me, for trusting me, for giving me a home and a family and 40 years of happiness, for teaching me that being lost sometimes leads to being found." James turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the same love that had been there on their wedding day, on the day each of their children was born, on every day in between. "Thank you for saying yes, for navigating us home, for being my partner in everything. For making my life so much more than I ever dreamed it could be." They kissed under the stars, an old couple still deeply in love, their journey together not yet finished but measured now in the legacy they had built. The Thornton Ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who would hear the story of how it all began. How a cowboy lost his guide and found a woman who could navigate by stars. How he asked her to lead his cattle drive and found instead the love of his life. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their story as they had from the beginning. And beneath those stars, Eliza and James Thornton sat together, hands entwined, hearts bound. Two souls who had found each other in the vast wilderness of the Wild West and had built something beautiful and lasting and true. Their story, like the stars, would endure. It would be told around campfires and dinner tables, passed down as family legend. The woman who navigated by stars better than any guide, and the cowboy who asked her to lead his cattle drive and found his heart's home. It was a story of courage and trust, of love found in unexpected places, of two people who took a chance on each other and created a legacy that would outlast them both. As the night deepened and the stars grew brighter, James helped Eliza to her feet. They stood together on the porch of the house they had built, looking out over the land they had tended. And then they turned and went inside together, as they had done every night for 40 years. The stars remained, constant and true, waiting to guide the next generation, waiting to witness the next chapter of the story that had begun one night in the Texas wilderness, when a lost cowboy and a stargazing woman found each other and changed both their destinies forever. Their love story was complete, beginning to end, and it was everything a Wild West romance should be. Adventurous, heartfelt, enduring, and true. From that first meeting by the creek to this final evening under the stars, Eliza and James had lived a life worth living, loved a love worth having, and built a legacy worth leaving behind. And as they closed the door behind them, stepping into the warmth of their home filled with the laughter of grandchildren and the memories of a lifetime, the stars continued their eternal dance above, forever marking the place where two hearts had found their home.